In heavens, we see Henry stepping out of the portal. He gazed at the endless sky, determined to see what the god of heaven looked like. As he stood there, white wings fluttered above, and the archangel Viltus appeared before him. Viltus remarked that he hadn't expected Henry to return so soon. With a serious expression, Henry told Viltus to get straight to the point. Viltus closed his eyes briefly and smiled, before asking why Henry had returned, and if he had made a different choice this time. Henry narrowed his eyes at the archangel and explained that he had a question to ask. Viltus said that Henry could proceed. Raising his hand slightly, Henry asked what this other choice was and whether it was true that he had been forced to try it 5 times. Viltus smiled widely and raised his eyebrows, as he admitted that he wanted to tell Henry the truth, but the god of heavens had forbidden him from revealing it. Enraged, Henry grabbed Viltus by the collar and demanded to be taken to the god of heaven immediately. Remaining calm, Viltus explained that he did not have the authority to take Henry directly to the god of heaven. However, he added that if another lead archangel granted permission, Henry could meet the god. As he spoke, Viltus plucked a feather from his wing and handed it to Henry with a faint smile. He instructed Henry to pour his divine power into the feather to summon the archangel who could grant access. Taking the feather, Henry blew on it and poured his power into it. A swirl of blue light appeared in front of him, and after it disappeared, an archangel with green hair and a proud expression was in front of Henry. This was the lead archangel, Angelus. Henry fixed a serious gaze on Angelus and asked if he was the archangel who could help him meet the god of heaven. Angelus, showing no interest in Henry's urgency, coldly stated that meeting the god of heaven required permission, and that even he couldn't meet the god whenever he wanted. Confused, Henry asked how he could obtain that permission. Angelus gave a slight smile and stated that the solution was simple. Without warning, Angelus pulled out his sword and drove it into the ground near Henry's feet. Angelus then explained that Henry needed to prove his will by offering an arm. Henry's brows furrowed in shock as he processed the archangel's arrogance. Clenching his teeth, he realized that Angelus was mocking him. Seeing Henry's anger, Angelus's expression turned even more sinister, as he added that instead of betting his arm, Henry should wager his neck. Henry stood motionless, fists clenched, as he thought about the challenge. He wondered if this was yet another test from the god of heaven. Angelus, growing impatient, asked if Henry was afraid to lose. Henry remained quiet, his anger growing. He suspected that the god of heavens had no intention of allowing him to win this bet. Realizing the negotiations were over, Henry grabbed the sword from the ground. Without hesitation, he swung the sword, releasing a blue aura as it cut through the air. Blood splattered across the ground, catching Angelus off guard. Henry approached the trembling archangel with a menacing expression. Angelus stared at him in horror, gripping his wounded wing. He tried to stop Henry, but the god of magic was merciless. Grabbing the wing firmly, Henry tore it off, showing no hesitation. The bloodied wing fell to the ground as Angelus knelt, shaking and looking powerless. Henry stood over him with his gaze cold. Looking down at the defeated archangel, Henry asked if this was enough to prove his will. Angelus bared his teeth, tears streaming down his face. Henry, standing nearby, looked at him without emotion and thought of how pathetic he looked. With his back turned to Angelus, Henry stared at the sky, clenching his fists. He wondered how someone who claimed to be a god could hide so cowardly and mock others instead of showing himself. Henry glanced at the broken archangel and believed Angelus behaved arrogantly because he expected his god to protect him. The mage raised his eyebrows slightly, clarifying that there was no misunderstanding. He, too, was a god, and nothing could change that. Stretching out his hand, the mage summoned a purple portal behind him. Angelus stared at the portal in shock, his mouth slightly open. A familiar voice came from the portal, and Ganasiel confirmed it was Henry on the other side. Henry responded, making it clear that he was indeed present. Ganasiel stepped out of the portal, spreading his snow-white wings. He held a sword tightly in his hands. Angelus, sitting on the ground, watched in horror, unable to believe what he was seeing. Ganasiel fixed his gaze on Angelus, recalling how Angelus took his place after he had been banished. His expression darkened as he clenched his fist, knowing that even if Angelus died now, the god they both once served would not intervene to save him. With a flash of red in his eyes, Ganasiel swung his sword. Angelus, wide-eyed with terror, stared at the weapon before it struck him. Angelus' body fell to the ground in pieces, bleeding as white steam rose from his injured body. Ganassil stood silently, staring at the ground with a grim expression, his sword still in hand. Henry watched him with curiosity, noticing the unfamiliar weapon. He wondered about the sword, having never seen it before. Ganassil held up the sword and gave a faint smile. He explained that the sword was called Lil Shaowain, and that it grew stronger with every soul it absorbed. He revealed that the sword had just taken Angelus's soul. Henry turned his gaze to the fallen archangel, his expression serious. He claimed it was time to seek the revenge that Ganassil wanted to do. Ganassil agreed quickly. Henry and Ganassil stood side by side, staring at the bloodied wings lying on the ground. Henry decided that the long-standing conflict between the demonic world and heaven would start. From that moment, he believed the great war between hell and heaven had officially begun. Ganassil stood behind Henry, who had opened a large demonic portal in front of him. He expected to see monstrous creatures come through. A clawed paw appeared first, followed by several demons crawling out. These demons were sent to cause chaos in the heavens at their own will. An archangel drew his sword and flew into battle. A group of archangels joined the fight, wielding swords made of light, clashing against demonic entities. One blonde archangel focused ahead as a bloodthirsty demon prepared to unleash an attack. The demon opened its mouth and released a powerful red energy beam into the sky, obliterating all archangels on the way. Other demons soon followed, launching attacks on the heavenly defenders. Ganassil observed the battle unfold. He knew the demons were strong enough to take over the heavens quickly, but he wasn't sure how things would end. The power of the God of Heaven could change everything. Henry glanced at Ganassil, who stood beside him, and wondered if the God of Heaven was too powerful. Ganassil squinted slightly and explained that the shrine of the God of Heaven held a divine item called the Heaven-Defying Lyre. This lyre seemed weak at first, but when the heavens were in great danger, it revealed incredible power. Henry's face grew tense as he tried to understand what kind of power the lyre had. Ganassil stretched his wings and confirmed that it was the power to control time. Henry then remembered seeing a group of demonic beasts fall from the sky after defeating angels on his first visit to heaven. Their sharp claws dug into the ground before their bodies landed heavily. He recalled how Viltus appeared holding the lyre and used it to bring his fallen comrades back to life. As Henry clenched his fists, he realized that Viltus had likely used the lyre to revive the angels by reversing time. However, Henry thought he was fortunate because he wouldn't need to ask the God of Heaven for help. Instead, all he had to do was take the lyre from Viltus to gain control of time himself. Henry saw an archangel falling from the sky, crashing down near him. Without hesitation, he grabbed the archangel by his clothes and glared at him with contempt. He demanded to know where Viltus was, his voice cold and threatening. The archangel's face twisted in fear as he stammered that he didn't know. Dark energy surrounded Henry, forming a sinister aura. His eyes burned with anger as he warned that if he didn't get an answer, he would destroy everyone in heaven. Terrified and confused, the archangel hesitated before plucking a glowing feather from his wing. He handed it to Henry, explaining that it would guide him to Viltus. Henry snatched the feather and nodded in approval. Then, with a powerful breath, he blew air at the feather. The glowing feather in Henry's hand began to pulse with energy as a blue aura surrounded him. He hovered in the air, carried by a swirling wind. Through the swirling light, Henry saw Viltus standing with a lyre in hand. The archangel, with golden hair, looked down at Henry, his expression cold and proud. He appeared to question Henry's presence, making it clear he was aware of the purpose of the visit. Henry narrowed his eyes and smirked. He made it clear that he was there for Viltus to get the heaven-defying lyre from his hands. Without hesitation, he extended his hand, and his trusted Colt sword appeared, ready for the confrontation ahead. A group of archangel defenders surrounded Viltus, determined to protect him. They moved forward to attack Henry, the god of magic. As they approached, Henry swung his blade and declared it wouldn't be fun if he got the lyre too easily. With a wave of his hand, he unleashed a blue beam of magic toward the archangels. The Knights of Heaven stood firm, holding the line against Henry's magic. They struggled to keep their ground as the powerful energy pushed against them. One of the defenders, narrowing his eyes, told the others to stay calm and hold steady. He pointed out that Henry's attacks weren't affecting them as expected. Henry simply smirked in response. Just then, the ground beneath them began to crack and rise. The archangels watched in shock, their eyes wide with fear. The ground trembled violently before splitting open with a massive explosion. Henry, watching from a distance as the archangels got obliterated by a powerful red aura from the ground. With a cold, arrogant expression, Henry explained that his attack wasn't just an ordinary slash. It carried a time delay, which made it more dangerous. He watched the chaos unfold before turning away. Without a hint of remorse, he bid farewell to his opponents, his smirk never fading. The bodies of the archangels lay scattered across the cracked ground. Viltus stood frozen, horrified by the sight, with sadness weighing heavily on him. Henry walked across the hot earth, his steps steady and proud. He thought about how much the God of Heaven had toyed with him, and decided it would be too easy to end things just yet. With a snap of his fingers, portals opened behind him, releasing monsters into the broken heaven. Viltus watched in silence, his mind numb. Fear crept into his heart as he saw monsters, and Ganasiel stepped through one of the portals. The pink-haired archangel walked with calm purpose, while Viltus stared back with anger. It had been a long time since they had seen each other. When Ganasiel opened his eyes, his gaze locked on Viltus. The blonde archangel glared at his old friend, his voice sharp, as he reminded him that he had been completely banished. Without a word, Ganasiel raised his hand and unleashed a stream of energy from his sword, powered up by Angelus's soul and that pierced Viltus's body. The force of the blow made Viltus stagger, blood dripping from his mouth. He fell to his knees, looking defeated. As Viltus knelt, gasping for breath, Henry approached him with a sword in hand. The blonde archangel looked up, his voice strained as he asked Henry if this was truly his choice. Henry, standing tall, met Viltus's gaze and calmly confirmed that it was. Viltus, clutching his wounded chest, called it a foolish choice since the God of Heaven would just rewind the time. Henry quickly responded that he knew, which totally surprised Viltus. Henry repeated it one more time that he knew, and despite that, he was doing the destruction. Viltus's hands trembled as he leaned against the ground. Henry, unfazed, asked him if he was holding the divine item that could rewind time. The blonde archangel reached for the lyre hidden at his side. Henry already knew the name of the item, and Viltus was taken aback. He then assumed Henry already heard the details of the lyre's powers from Ganasiel. The fallen archangel stood quietly, watching the exchange with caution. Henry and Ganasiel both kept their eyes on Viltus, who sat with the lyre in his hands. Viltus spoke through gritted teeth, explaining that the lyre had the power to turn back time, revive the dead, and even make them stronger. His grip on the instrument tightened as his anger boiled over. He shouted that he would not kill his brothers twice. The lyre's light grew brighter, and Henry's expression shifted with alarm. He realized something was about to go terribly wrong. Henry reached out, trying to stop what was happening, but it was too late. The lyre glowed too brightly, exhausting its power, to the point that it started cracking. Henry almost had it on his reach, but the lyre cracked into pieces in the end. The exhausted Viltus closed his eyes and whispered that everything was happening according to God's will. The realization of Henry's failure hit him hard, and frustration boiled over. He cursed out loud, knowing he could no longer control what came next. Smoke came from the broken lyre lying on the ground, showing that its power was used up. Henry looked at the broken divine item in shock. Ganasiel stood behind him and said it was just a mere item, telling Henry not to worry because the power of time still belonged to the God of Heaven. The archangel stood behind Henry and looked at the broken lyre with him. Henry agreed, saying that even if he stayed in despair, nothing would change. He closed his eyes, feeling a bit sad, and then turned to Ganasiel, asking where the God of Heaven might be. The archangel replied that he knew where the temple was in the heavens, but the gods were unpredictable, so he couldn't be sure if the God of Heaven would be there. Henry looked away, surrounded by dust, and said there was no need to worry. He just wanted to know where the temple was. They arrived at the temple of the God of Heavens. It was a large temple in the sky, above the clouds. Ganasiel, who was with Henry, placed his hand on his chest and spoke to the God of Heaven. He said his name and mentioned that he had crawled back from hell to take revenge. Henry and the archangel watched as a bright flash of light appeared. Ganasiel demanded that the god show his face immediately. Henry and the Archangel watched as a large built god appeared from the glowing light. Ganasiel looked at the god, filled with anger, and tried to attack him with his sword. He told the god that he would make him pay for sending him to the demon world. The god watched as Ganasiel flew at him, seeking revenge. The god of heavens, seeing the anger and hate, snapped his fingers. The Archangel froze in place right before his sword hurt the god. Henry stood shocked with his eyes wide open. The old man barely avoided the sharp sword and joked that the Archangel had been in the demon world for too long, becoming a monster himself. The god walked past Ganasiel, who was frozen in place, and then past the Archangel, who stood motionless with his sword still out. The god walked toward Henry and told the mage that now they could talk in peace. Henry realized that Ganasiel was right, because the god of heaven could use the power of time without the lyre, since the power was not in it. The old man stared ahead, his brow slightly furrowed. The god addressed Henry and said that, in the many repeating cycles of time they met for the first time, Henry stood opposite and stared at the god, telling him that he had a request. Henry looked angrily as the old man began to laugh. Loudly he realized that Henry wanted to borrow the power of time from him. He looked at Henry sarcastically, leaning his hand over his face. He stated that he had heard this story, that Henry wanted to clean up the mess Janus recently made, and did not understand why. While the god was thinking about whether to give Henry the power or not, Henry was becoming more frustrated. The old man was deciding whether to lend him the power of time. The old man pointed his finger forward, surprising Henry a little. He explained that he couldn't give him the power because it would break the rule of equity. Henry didn't understand what he meant. The old man went on to say that he had met people like Henry before, those who started with good intentions but ended up making things worse. He explained that time was much more special and powerful than any other force. Henry clenched his fists, looking furious. He yelled that he already knew all of this and added that he wasn't doing this for his own benefit, but to fix the problems created by another god. The old man waved him off and said that lending the power of time would still be difficult. He pointed out that Henry had started the heavenly war between the heavens and the demonic world, and for that reason, it was hard to trust Henry, who was responsible for so much chaos. The god of heavens looked at Henry with contempt and accused him of all the sins. The mage stood with clenched fists while facing the old man. The god asked Henry if he understood how tainted the history of the heavens was, as they had never been defeated before. The old man looked down on Henry and told him to stop acting like a child, because a god would look foolish doing that. Henry, very angry and shocked, hung his head. The old man didn't understand why he cared about human affairs, since he had become the god of magic already. As Henry began to feel defeated, he knelt on the ground with his hand trembling. The old man frowned, thinking Henry had no way out. He continued to look down on him. Henry looked up in shock, and the god realized that Henry couldn't show aggression anymore, meaning he had calmed down. The old man clapped his hands, and a bright light appeared behind him, covering the god. Henry watched the light with anticipation. Against the background of the magic circle and the mechanism, scenes that happened a while ago appeared. The gears of time did their work, and the time returned to the time when Henry summoned his Colt sword. Henry jumped into the air and flew with his sword, holding it tightly. He wanted to see Viltus and told him not to hide while playing his instrument. Henry stood there in anger while waiting for Viltus. When he heard his name, he turned quickly while looking angry. Viltus appeared while casually holding a lyre, with his followers flying behind him. The Archangel explained that the instrument was no ordinary lyre. Viltus looked at Henry and called him the imperfect god and warned him to stop his struggles. Henry grinned and looked at the Archangel with a wicked smile. He said the Archangel was saying strange things and didn't understand why he should stop if he hadn't even started. Hearing how the Archangel talked to him casually, he wondered if Viltus was pretending to know him, despite meeting for the first time. The Archangel just sighed, like he already knew something about Henry. Henry watched as the Archangel took out a bottle with a glowing liquid. Viltus asked him to take the bottle and said it was a gift from the god of heavens. Henry took the bottle and inspected at it closely, surprised by the gift. The Archangel explained that it wasn't poison. He said that the god of heaven had promised that Henry would understand everything after drinking it. Henry knew poisons didn't affect him because of the venom heart he had eaten, so he decided to try the liquid in one go. The taste was horrible, and he wiped his mouth in disgust. He exclaimed that Viltus was lying when he said it was not poison at all. Suddenly, Henry's eyes began to glow and broke into cold sweat. He dropped the bottle in shock and started wobbling. Henry grabbed his head in pain and felt tired. As his eyes glowed bright golden, he thought about his past moments with the Archangel, challenging the God of Heaven, and all the memories of his time in heaven filled his mind. He realized that the God of Heaven had refused to help him, not because of someone ordering it, but because of the so-called equity. This meant that the God of Heaven hadn't helped him because of something other than his own stubbornness. Henry smiled cruelly, knowing that he still had one last option. A bright light surrounded the clouds, and a rainbow appeared. Henry said that all of this was unnecessary. The Archangel suddenly grew nervous and held the lyre tightly, realizing that Henry had decided to fight again. Henry pulled out his sword, grinning, and noted that he no longer needed the lyre. Viltus floated in the air while other archangels flew in to protect him. Henry told them to watch closely, saying he had come up with a better plan. He pointed his sword at the archangels, who quickly rushed forward to protect Viltus. They were all prepared to fight Henry for the sake of protecting Viltus. With a grin, Henry swung his sword quickly, spilling blood. His bloody sword dropped to the ground. The group of archangels watched Henry carefully, and Viltus looked at him with worry and confusion. Henry lay in a pool of his own blood, having hurt himself. The worried archangels looked at each other in fear and worry. That was until a bright light shone nearby. The light spread across the area and blinded everyone in the area. Viltus squinted his eyes, grimacing from the brightness. His eyes widened when he heard from a familiar voice that it was an interesting feeling of being reborn for the second time. Henry then stepped forward and asked the archangels what they were doing. He stood tall, asking the archangels why they didn't bow to him. Viltus nervously broke into a cold sweat, realizing that Henry had given up his mortal body and had become a full god. All the archangels knelt, and Viltus and his companions bowed before Henry, respectfully greeting the god of magic. Henry swung his sword and told them they would pay for their actions. He swung it quickly, and the sound of screams echoed through the area. That concludes this part of the recap. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to see what happens next. If you want to see the next part, let me know in the comments section below. Till next time.